Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. Jeff did a great lead-in to the providing analytical framework for what I want to talk about, and I also want to thank the people who come. It's a beautiful day. I'm kind of surprised we get so many people, but I guess I assume it's the importance of the topic we all appreciate. Just a little by way of background is that this is the region I think is very interesting to study because it's a bit different from the kind of security environment we have, for example, in the Middle East or in East Asia or in Europe. Central Asia has fallen a bit outside many of the arms control networks that are active in other areas. And it's also not been an active area of military conflict. And now we have a situation in which NATO is pretty, except for Afghanistan, is pretty much pulled out of the region along with the U.S. China is still reluctant to intervene militarily. And so when I talk about Russia's role in there, it's really a relative situation. It's a dominant player. You've seen Buildup recently, but it's limited, and it's just because they have a vacuum that's why I consider this important. Russia has clear bases, as people know. I'm just going to go this briefly, because I'm sure most people here know this. Has important military facilities and bases in Central Asia. Often these are termed part of the CSTO, which is the same strategy Chinese use. They will give loans, but say it's, we're giving this as part of the CSTO, but often it's just a bilateral relationship. And that's a way you can see some of the Russian military activities. Even when they say it's part of the CSTO, it's often more a bilateral relationship put under this multilateral gloss for legitimacy purposes or other reasons. The major facilities are in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. In Kyrgyzstan, Russia is providing, it has a major air base in Kant, which has about a dozen fighter planes, some transport helicopters, and other planes, perhaps 500 soldiers. Number varies. All these numbers are relative. It's going to depend a bit on what else they're doing. And now with Syria, there's been spraying time, and there's always rotations and so on. So I'm just giving you approximate numbers. The base there is important because from there, Russia can pretty much, the Russian Air Force can operate pretty rapidly and pretty quickly throughout much of Central Asia. The U.S., for example, was able to do that when it had bases in Manas in Kyrgyzstan, but now the closest U.S. base is in Romania, so it's a bit harder. Russia also has some naval facilities at the Lake Buildup. It has a communications hub there. There's some space facilities. Tajikistan is the other large Russian facility. There's the 201st Motorized Rifle Division based there with thousands of personnel. Its official function is to help the Tajik security forces maintain stability. As you know, Tajikistan was at a point that had a civil war previously and has been there have been incidents in the country about potential Islamic groups, militants fighting, and so the forces are there. But Russia's always had forces there in the Soviet period and more recently to maintain the border. Now, they've turned over border functions to the Tajik authorities, but the Russians, of course, are there, and they've indicated they're prepared to reinforce the border if it would be necessary. The forces in the country are, in addition to the troops, there are attack helicopters and so on. This is not really smothered, it's not better. All right. Now, the question is, why are there forces in the country? Now, the public reason is external threats, and that is credible. So you've got worries about Afghanistan. The militants are active there. It's a major source of regional drug trafficking. Russia has long complained about this, as have the other CSTO members. And both directly because of the harm it does to the local people who use it, but also from the fact that the terrorists and other and criminal activities and so on are promoted by the use of the money they gain from this. They can use it to purchase weapons or bribe local security services and undermine regional stability. Russia has long blamed NATO for this situation, claiming that what NATO needs to have done is just do what it did in Colombia, which is drop a lot of herbicides on the countryside and destroy the poppy fields. But NATO commanders have always been reluctant to do that, since that would really help the Taliban gain recruits, because people would be out of a job, and the Taliban can claim that the Americans are poisoning your fields and so on. More recently, the Russian concern has been that NATO is pulling out too quickly. And so whenever there's these deadlines approaching, the Russian officials at the highest levels warn that it's premature. Russia, it's sort of the argument, and you broke it, you gotta fix it. And the worry is that if NATO forces pull out entirely, then this burden falls on Russia, mostly to try and deal with. There are other Islamic groups active in the region besides the Taliban whose aspirations are unknown. I mean, it's not clear that there's a Taliban aspiration to promote jihad in Central Asia or Russia, but there are other groups that do profess such an aspiration. Islamic movement in Uzbekistan has been a long-term concern. There are other groups which are questionable whether they have that. The Hizbut Tahrir has been, and the Muslim Brotherhood it's debatable. I'm not an expert, but people argue whether these are considered genuine terrorist groups with aspiration to establish, global jihad. Al-Qaeda hasn't been that active in Central Asia. They've mostly been focused in other areas. They've formed regional alliances with the IMU and militants and so on, and provide some training. And the IMU was able to relocate and fight with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Tajikistan and Afghanistan. The one effect it has had has been to radicalize more of the Islamic activists there. They're more militant, more see themselves part of the global effort rather than focus on just the reforming Afghanistan itself. And this trend has been amplified now by the rise of the Islamic State. That's the main focus now of recent Russian and CSTO alarm. This Islamic State people debate what extent it's active in Afghanistan, what extent it has cells, recruiting and so on. It's clear that there are people from Central Asia and Russia that are being recruited by Islamic State now to go fight in Syria. And you can argue that whether that's maybe useful for Russia and the countries because it's pulling the terrorists away, or potential terrorists. But the problem, of course, everyone realizes, and this problem in Europe too, is then at some point they may return, and then they're just going to wage jihad at the homeland, and that's the outermost concern. At times, Russian officials have warned about this social revolutions, U.S. and NATO efforts to overthrow through color revolutions, local governments, citing U.S. effort. Whenever there's a major disturbance, such as in Uzbekistan a decade ago, the Russians have been trying to cite that as evidence that the U.S. democracy promotion efforts were just a rubric for regime change. This line, at least in public, has not been kept visible so much in many of the Central Asian leaders. Some of them say this, to what extent they believe in private, I don't know. It resonates actually more with China now. The Chinese have been like the idea, the Russians have said that Hong Kong is a Western plot to destroy, overthrow a regime. Central Asians are still a little bit more ambiguous about democracy promotion and human rights activities of the West. So Russia's but the argument about Islamic terrorism appears to have traction, and then the question is whether this is, how sincerely this is seen as a threat, or maybe perhaps this is instrumentally useful for Russia, because there was initial resistance to building up the CSTO as a more powerful security institution, but in recent years, Afghanistan, Georgia, the events in Kyrgyzstan in 2010, so on, and the Russian warning about this Islamic threat has weakened the opposition and allowed the CSTO to take a lot of functions which initially were resisted. Why is Russia using these military tools? Well, they certainly employed other tools. In Afghanistan, for example, they have relaunched a lot of the Soviet-era industrial efforts. They have provided a lot of diplomatic support for the Afghan peace efforts and the Afghan run. Karzai was strictly, because of his alienation from the U.S., was strictly close to Russia. He supported the annexation of Crimea, for example. The new government is a bit more China-focused, a bit more balanced. They're not clearly close to Russia. But Russia certainly has tried to improve its ties with Afghanistan and offered more training military support than, for example, China. It's tried to work with other governments too. I mean, working with the West has been difficult, obviously, for the reasons we know, Ukraine and so on. Tried to work with China, but the Chinese, as we know, have been reluctant to engage directly in military assistance to the Afghan government, at least in Afghanistan itself, because of, I guess, they would prefer not to have the Islamic forces focus on China as a potential threat. They'd rather basically keep their distance and free ride on the Western and perhaps Russian efforts. India has been a bit more useful partner for Russia. There have been various ideas that India could buy weapons from Russia and then Russia would provide these to the Afghans, but it's been limited. And so the CSTO is the main mechanism through which Russia relies on these military tools, and it's understandable why, but even that tool has certain disadvantages. The Russian primacy in the organization, the hub and spoke model certainly is visible there, provides benefits for the country, so they get subsidized weapons. In theory, they can buy weapons at Russian domestic prices, so they get training. There are various ideas about cost sharing, industrial cooperation. Not really clear how much this is occurring. So far, Kazakhstan has been working very closely with Russia. The Kazakhs provide their elite forces to CSTO, and they've been working in partnership with Russia to build up the organization. The other countries, not so much. And of course, the Russian dominance organization has some disadvantages. NATO refuses to have anything to do with the group. It's seen as basically the fear NATO has if you deal with the CSTO, you're going to legitimize Russian domination of the region. And Uzbekistan has stayed aloof from the organization because of its close ties with Russia, and certainly Georgia, membership of Georgia or Turkmenistan will be difficult because of this perception. Now with the disputes over Ukraine and so on, it's this. I think that the CSTO's ability to reach out to the West is limited. The CSTO also has certain capacity limits. At times, it was thought that the organization could assist member governments under an internal threat, but the events in Kyrgyzstan in 2010, when the Kyrgyz government actually turned to the CSTO and asked for some kind of assistance, and the CSTO said, well, it's really an internal situation, we're designed for external threats, and so we wouldn't send peacekeeping forces, shocked some of the leaders, particularly Lukashenko in Belarus was really upset by that decision. He wanted to have the potential support of the CSTO forces if there was internal disturbances. They've since modified their charter and developed capabilities that would allow, in theory, this kind of intervention, but nothing's occurred yet. And it's also not evident how well the CSTO would perform any actual operation. It's never conducted any military operation. In Afghanistan, potentially the main threat, it's also not been that active. There are ties, diplomatic ties, and so on. But basically, CSTO is focused mostly on counter-drug operations, and not in Afghanistan, but interdiction efforts to the north, these channel exercises. But they have not been that successful. The interdiction of the drug flow has not been very high. There's also the question of potentially competing organizations. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is an obvious one. Have memberships very overlapping, authorities. In theory, the CSTO is focused on military security, whereas the SCO focuses on everything, but particularly even in the security areas, more internal security law, counterterrorism. But in practice, if relations between Russia and China deteriorate, or if China feels Russia's unable to secure its interest in the region, you're going to see more visible, perhaps tensions between what the CSTO can do and what the SCAO can do. Now, the one last pause I want to get to is Russia had announced plans to build up its forces much further, particularly in Tajikistan, but they've since walked back from that. And the interesting question is why. I mean, could it be cost constraints, or could it be they're overtaxed with Ukraine and Syria, or perhaps they, with the withdrawal of NATO and so on, they feel less of a need to have forces there, and perhaps they're more confident about their power projection capabilities. I mean, the fact that they're able to deploy forces in Syria, the long-range cruise strikes from their ships, the SNAP exercises in which Russia has been able to mobilize large numbers of forces very rapidly along its periphery. The fact that Russia has many internal security and paramilitary forces that they could potentially use for an operation in Central Asia. So in a way, Russia can rapidly send forces to the region without much impediment. So perhaps that's why it doesn't need to keep that many forces there. And finally, this is not, we can get at some other point, of course, Russia has other means of exerting its influence in Central Asia. Energy ties, economic ties, compatriots, media control. So it doesn't need to rely on kinetic forces. And as we've seen in Ukraine and other areas, Russia's preference actually is to avoid that. So that's something we should be watching in coming years, because I think we'll get a better sense of where Russia wants to go in terms of its tools of influence in the region. Thank you.